Hi. In this particular video session, what we're going to look at is a worked example of a price control, how you calculate or how you actually visualize the impact of a price control. So in this example, what we're seeing is that we have an equation here where it says L superscript D is equal to 240 minus 30W, where W is dollar wages per hour. So what we're saying is that in this economy, the demand for labor is represented by this equation. So anytime we were to plug a value for W, let's say we said let W equal 1, it means 1 multiplied by 30 is 30, and therefore the demand for labor when the wage is $1 per hour would be 240 minus 30, which will actually be 210. So when the price of wages are $1, the demand for labor is 240. So it means that at such a low wage, firms will demand a very high quantity. So again, this equation that we're seeing here describes for us how much units or how many individuals will be demanded in terms of firms demanding their services at a particular wage. Here, this economy is described by this particular supply curve for labor. Right, L superscript S is equal to 30W. So here we see that if we were to put a value of 1 for W in this equation, we realize that when the price of wages or when the value of wages are $1 per hour, the supply of labor would be 30. Alright, so that's how we interpret these equations. So based upon the equations that we have here, what we want to do is first of all determine what is the free market price for labor services. That is wages. Remember, wages are the price paid for labor. So we want to simply determine what would be the equilibrium wage rate. Okay? What will be the wage rate that will result in the demand for laborers being equal to the supply of laborers? Additionally, what we want to know is the impact if prices, in this case here, wages, were deliberately set at $7 per hour. Remember, in this particular scenario, we're looking at the demand and supply for labor, and the price of labor is wage. So what we're in fact saying is what would be the impact if wages were deliberately set at $7 per hour. Thirdly, we'll be required to state what type of price control is implemented, right? So that's $7 per hour. We should be able to determine what type of price control it is, whether it was a price floor or a price ceiling. And lastly, or second to last, we're saying is that we need to state what is the impact upon the quantity of labor being demanded and supplied in the market. Okay? So what we're asking is that when this $7 per hour is deliberately set, regardless of what the market price was, we need to first figure out what type of price control this was. Then secondly, we need to state what is the impact upon the quantity of labor being demanded and the supply and the amount of labor being supplied in the market. And then we'll be required to critically analyze the impact of this price control. Alright, so again, we have our equations. The demand for labor, LD equals 240 minus 30W. We have the supply of labor described by L superscript S is equal to 30W. And these are the questions that we would seek to answer in this particular scenario. We want to determine what is the free market price for labor services. And then, given that the prices are deliberately set at $7 per hour, what we want to determine is what type of price control this is, 1. 2. What is the impact upon the quantity of labor being demanded and supplied in the market? And 3, critically analyze the impact of this price control. Moving on. We see here that prices of any good or service is determined in a free market conditions. So that is when equilibrium between the quantity demanded and the quantity supplied of the product in question. So let me rephrase it one more time. You would have learned earlier on in the course that the price of any product or service is determined in the free market, and it will be the price that results in the unique situation where the amount of goods being demanded would be equal to the amount that is willing to be supplied. And that is what will be the market equilibrium price. So therefore, the equilibrium wage rate can be determined by equating demand and supply. So in this case here, we're going to be looking at the demand for labor equation and equating it to the supply of labor equation. And after we put them equal, we need to solve for W. So we know that the demand for labor equation is minus 30 plus 240, and the supply of labor is 30W. Okay? So when LD is equal to LS, so we equate the two equations. Minus 30W plus 240 is equal to 30W. Simply, therefore, we put all the like terms together. So minus 30, if you carry it across the equal sign, you get 30 plus 30W plus 30W gives you 60W equals to 240. And then to find out for W, you simply divide it to get rid of the 60, you have to divide by 60 on the right hand side, and therefore what you do on the right hand side, you have to do on the other side of the equation, and therefore it's 240 divided by 60 equals W, and the value is 4. So by equating the demand for labor and the supply for labor equations, we ultimately work out that W is equal to 4. And remember, that is a dollar wage per hour. So therefore what we're saying is that labor is paid $4 per hour when allowed to operate, when the price of wages, or the price of labor, is allowed to be determined freely in market conditions. So we move on to now answer the other questions of what will actually happen when the equilibrium price is disturbed, meaning an intentional price is set that was not determined by the market but actually may have been set by the government. Okay? So we have determined the equilibrium price, and let's now determine now what is the equilibrium quantity. How much labor will actually be demanded and supplied at this price of $4 per hour for labor. And then we're going to move on to looking at the implications of a wage being set at $7. Okay, so to find out the equilibrium quantity of labor, all we simply do is choose either one of the equations, the demand for labor or the supply for labor equation, and we substitute the W and put the value of 4, because we know that 4 is the equilibrium wage. And what we see here therefore is that minus 30 brackets 4 plus 240, this means we're going to multiply 30 and 4, which will give us negative 120 plus 240, and negative 120 plus 240 will result in 240 minusing 120, which gives us a value of positive 120. And we see therefore that the demand for labor at equilibrium is 120. And we could also use the supply for labor equation, and we'll still also get that value of 120. And we'll quickly do that now, and then we shall move on. So we have our supply for labor equation. LS is equal to 30W. And all we simply do is to substitute W for the value of 4. We have therefore, let me just correct this quickly. Okay, beautiful. My apologies for the error before. So LS is equal now 30 brackets 4, and therefore it means we're going to multiply this value of 4 by 30, and ultimately we get LS is equal to 120. So we realize that whether we used the demand for labor equation or the supply for labor equation, the value will always be equal, because 4 is the unique price of labor that will result in the demand and the supply for labor being equal, and that's why we call it equilibrium. So let's move on now to see the impact and see when a price is set that was not determined by the market but by an arbitrary mechanism, and in this case we could call it the government. So what is the impact of the price being intentionally set at $7 in the market? Well, what we need to ask is, what is the demand for labor when wage equals 7? Okay, and what we simply do is, again, we have the demand for labor equation, minus 30W plus 240, and therefore we're going to substitute W with the value 7, and therefore we have minus 30 brackets 7 plus 240, and therefore when we multiply minus 30 with 7, we simply get minus 210 plus 240, which gives us a value overall of 30. So this line here is redundant. Okay, so this was included in error. So our value here is 30. Minus 210 plus 240 equals 30. So when the value of 7 for the wage is being set, it results in the demand for labor being 30 units. So at a wage of $7 per hour, firms will demand, or a particular firm will demand only 30 workers because of a wage of $7. But what about the supply? Well, when the wage is $7, we're asking ourselves what will be the supply of labor. So LS is equal to 30W, that's the equation. We substitute for 7, we have the supply of labor is equal to 30 multiplied by 7, the supply of labor is equal to 210. Do you realize something? Because the price $7 was not determined by the market, but it was determined arbitrarily. It was determined by an external force outside of the market conditions. It means that it resulted in a situation of disequilibrium because the demand for labor is 30 units and the supply of labor is 210. And it makes sense because if the price is now $7, meaning the price has risen, it means the demand for the product, in this case, which is labor, would fall because price has risen. However, the supply would rise. Remember, because price is a reward for the supplier, but it's a cost to the demander. Okay? So, with a wage of $7 per hour, it results in demand for labor being equal to 30. So there's a demand for only 30 workers. But the supply is 210. 210 persons are willing to work when the wage is equal to $7 per hour. Thus, there's a shortage in demand and a surplus in supply. You can say it in those two ways. So this price control of $7, since it was placed above the equilibrium price of $4, it means it was meant to protect the supplier. As such, we can see that this particular price control is a price floor. Because when you look at the definition of a price floor is usually set above the equilibrium price in order to protect the supplier, the seller. In this particular case, the seller is the laborer. The laborer is selling their services and the firms are demanding it. That is what happens in the labor market. All right? In the labor market, the sellers are the laborers, they are selling their services, and the demanders are the firms, because firms demand labor in order to produce their goods and services. So as a result, because this price, we have an external price being set by the government of $7, and this $7 is higher than the equilibrium price, we know that these are characteristics of a price floor, which is the minimum price that sellers can be rewarded for the goods and services that they supply. Okay? So ultimately, due to the artificial increase in price, demand for the product, in this case labor, fell drastically as price is a costed demander, but supply increased drastically as price is a reward or incentive to the supplier. However, with the supply of labor exceeding the demand for labor, it ultimately results in some people not being able to find jobs in the economy. And that is one of the most critical issues when a price floor is implemented in the labor market. And of course, an example of a price floor we could call the minimum wage. The minimum wage is meant to protect the laborers because the equilibrium price is too low. It may not be affording them the ability to have a proper quality of life. But when a minimum wage is set, it means that the price will be higher than what firms may have been willing to pay, and therefore it may lead to the retrenchment of some workers in the labor market. So this example was geared to give you a further understanding of how you can understand how you mathematically illustrate price controls and also their impacts. Thank you, and I hope this was clear and able to give you further understanding on price controls. Have a good day.